is a futurist. She's calling in from Houston today. She's a consultant, a lecturer, a futurist with partners in Foresight. She is a Texan, and I guess very topical in terms of the last couple months. She was a volunteer voter registrar. So A, thank you for doing that good tiding, and B, thank you for joining us today, Alexandra.
Thanks so much for having me.
One of my longtime colleagues, Rob Salkowitz, is joining us from Washington today. He's a strategist, he's an author, he runs RS Associates Inc. He has authored 6 different books and is really focused in terms of just tumbling both tech and marketing and customer and a range of different things. He's a bit of a Renaissance man when it comes to the future, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today, Rob.
It's a pleasure.
And Servane Mouazan, she is calling in from London today. She's managing director of Ubuntu, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm all right, good, close enough. You're giving me the good signals. She's focused on social and green and different tech causes. She runs an interesting B Corp that's focused on, building ecosystems out for women and women in charge of companies. And she has just a very rich background in terms of industry experience, working with companies and trying to create positive impact for the world. Welcome, Servane.
Thanks for having me, and hello, colleagues.
All right. Are you guys ready to do battle and kind of get at it today? Because we've got a lot of stuff to cover off here, guys. We're trying to cover off 12 questions in a span of an hour. And just for the people that are listening, we're going to go an hour on this one, and then we're going to have our panelists hang out for another 10 or 15 minutes if other questions emerge from our audience today. So first of all, we'll cover off optimism. I think our optimism may have changed. I know mine has changed since the beginning of the pandemic. Most of the time estimates that we probably had at the start are different than the ones that we thought coming out. Here's some of our raw research. And, for the data geeks in the world, you can look at all the different variables in terms of how people that answered our survey. But the average optimism score of our panelists that answered our survey was 4.27 out of 7. And then we also asked, how does that compare to what you would have said at the pandemic start? And although I think people have changed, the averages actually stayed the same. So it's like, people's sense in aggregate hasn't really changed since the start of the pandemic. So I'll turn it over to my panelists, and maybe Alexandra, I'll start with you. Impressions on optimism, both your own and what you're seeing in these numbers.
Well, my own optimism is, extremely skewed towards optimism. As a futurist, I think that's one of my main characteristics. So, personally, I continue to look on the bright side and believe that this crisis is going to end up with something even better that we couldn't have even imagined. And in terms of the results from the survey, it's very interesting to me that so little has changed. Maybe that is, similar to what I just stated. My optimism levels have stayed high and other people's have stayed low, medium, or high. I guess we're going to see that change with the vaccine news soon.
Cross your fingers, right? Although I think the vaccine's kind of one plank of a number of things, perhaps, Alexandra. I'm not too sure. Maybe I could be wrong on that. Rob, thoughts on optimism?
I mean, I am not temperamentally the most optimistic person. I'm sort of the toast lands butter side down most of the time. However, the last month has really, I feel like there has been a parting of the clouds. And I think that any optimism score or any temperature that you're going to take of public opinion, you're really chasing a moving target right now, because I think the velocity of news and developments has accelerated just in the last month. I mean, even 30 days ago, to me, the 2 biggest complications were that there was a lot of uncertainty around the science and a sort of bottleneck on the vaccine process, and also just a lack of, frankly, competence and public will on the public health administration side. And I think that, at least in the United States, both of those things have turned around, or have the prospect of turning around a lot better. I think we're going to see a lot more of a coordinated, expert-driven public health response that will take care of a lot of the problem. And I think that even if the vaccine isn't an overnight panacea, that it'll start leading the way toward, the kind of numbers that will allow us a little bit more freedom, a little bit more openness in how we conduct ourselves.
Wonderful. And you're right. I mean, you mentioned America too. I know that this has a much different perspective when I looked at other studies in terms of different optimism levels in Japan versus, let's say, China, two very different ones. But Servane, what's your observations on optimism sitting here December 1st as we
Yeah,
are?
I'm someone who adapts. So again, that's going to be a bit skewed. So I think it's a long, never-ending winter or summer, depending on where you are in the world. But I've seen some nuggets of brilliance in how people organize themselves and how learning passes on. So again, I hope people adapt. So I think people might not be dreaming of with the same dreams as they had before, but they adapt to that inconsistency, or they adapt to the unlinear events, and it's maybe they translate that as optimism, and they're clutching onto hope. So I'll tell more about how specific sectors or systems adapt themselves and how they show their brilliance. But I think it's a bit of sort of being accustomed to that process. About vaccines, I don't know. I hear some people were not ready to take it, so I'm not sure about. I'm not really positioned about that yet. But I think that people find their niche about what topic or what issue they really want to hang on to and maybe contribute to help.
All right, that's a good way to get started. A good range of viewpoints on that one too. I know it was funny, Servane, you mentioned the long winter or something around winter. I mean, physically it's
never
winter,
ending.
One of our respondents also mentioned in terms of, I guess they were on the negative side of the fence, just it's going to be a long winter. It's lasting longer. There's more polarization, and there's a bit of despair and hope or lack of hope. And on the other side, you had mentioned as well resilience, and people have been warmed by the fact that there's a learning mindset change and some easing anxiety. But I got to say, if you look back at the stats again, there's a whack load of us in the middle trying to figure out which side of the fence we're on this one. So we're going to move on to the next one. This is probably one of the more important questions we asked. We looked at not just the things that might inconvenience us for the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but something that may drop out of this over the next 10 to 20 years. We actually asked this in a number of different ways, but we did actually serve up these 39. We actually thought 39 different problems. We must have been having a really bad day 2 months ago when we pulled this list together.
It's a heavy one.
Yeah, I know. Like, it was like, God, this could be really horrible here. And so with no further ado, drum roll or snare drum, we really should afford these in terms of our future webcasts. Here's what people said out of that list of 39. These were the top 7. Crushing government debt, mental health challenges, and middle-class income number shrinking, wealth disparity, however you look at that, were the gold, silver, bronze medals of problems that we think may last decades, if not generation, in terms of coming out of the pandemic. I did add some things quantitatively to this in the outside world from a government debt standpoint. Certainly back in 2010, the U.S. had 60% of their debt was 60% of GDP. Now it's climbed well over 100% coming out of this. Mental health challenges, it seems to be, and I've got some disturbing stats. Certainly early on in the pandemic, there was an 8-fold jump in anxiety, a 3-fold jump on depression, a 10-fold jump on stress. And that was a global study done in the throes of the pandemic. And then finally, I ran across a stat today that said 30 billionaires have increased their wealth during this pandemic, 34%. Yet, at least from a U.S. number, there's about 18 million people in the U.S. that are in danger of losing their homes because they can't afford their housing payment. So there is this two sides of it all. Maybe, Rob, I can point to you on the government debt side of the fence. We know it's gone up. You might have a unique take on this. What's your thought?
Well, I thought this was an interesting finding because I think that a lot of this is, like most of us, I'm not an economist. This is an area of interest for me, and I follow it fairly closely. But a lot of what I was reading, even before all of this started to happen, is that a lot of the ways that we think about government debt in particular is just wrong. Like the way that economics views government debt, because when there's money, money serves two purposes. It's a store of value and a medium of exchange. And those two things are sometimes in conflict. And so when what is needed in the world is a liquid medium of exchange, then government debt is a really good thing, especially the US, because most sovereign debt is denominated in US dollars. And so to the extent that our debt is growing, what that's doing is it's funding liquidity all around the world. People are borrowing dollars at low amounts. And so, there's a complicated way of saying this seems to be a problem if your mindset is, if you expand the supply of money, the value of money is going to go down. That's the inflationary spiral. The markets don't seem to agree with that. And 30-year interest rates are at an all-time low. So I think there's reason to believe that that may not be quite right. There's a really good book on this subject called The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton that just came out that sort of explains this new economic thinking. But to me, given all the stuff that's going on, it's really interesting to me that something that is so abstract and may not even be real is what's taking up most of our mental space.
Yeah, it is. Well, like anything in the pandemic, it's like what stresses us and what may be factual and impact us sometimes are not necessarily the same thing. But it's an interesting perspective. I know, I get two different sorts of reactions on the debt one. On the mental health one, I'm not too sure, Alexandra, we had a pre-call. Which one did you take of was it middle class or was it mental health that you want to tackle?
Yeah, I thought I might, speak to the mental health challenges. That's just something that was bubbling up before the pandemic, right? We already had a loneliness epidemic, as it was called, and now we've put a health pandemic on top of it. So I read recently that in terms of COVID, people who have been diagnosed with COVID, I think it was 1 in 10, if I'm not mistaken, are then being diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis, some sort of issue, Alzheimer's, depression, insomnia, within the first 3 months of their diagnosis. So I think that, long term, those problems are being addressed, it appears, but, long term, what is that going to look like? How are we going to handle this, effect of COVID, not to mention the lockdowns and social distancing, which are very good and important policies, but we can't overlook the fact that they do have impacts, particularly, on older people, kids, being separated from their friends, as well as the people that are working on the front lines.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I read in a mental health study that one of the biggest things of coping with mental health, I think 85% of people like to socialize with other people to get over their mental health challenges. Well, you've now, in a lot of different geographies, taken that away as an option. It kind of conflates the issue, doesn't it?
Totally. I think we're fortunate, though, again, putting an optimistic spin, we have been connected through technology, and there are some really innovative things bubbling up in the mental health area, like the use of hallucinogenics like mushrooms and LSD to help people overcome severe PTSD, for example, which I think we're facing on a societal scale. So I think there's sort of an interesting Brave New World future, perhaps, scenario that we could talk about where, we use the advances that we have to contain a very massive mental health challenge.
See, here I am trying to be all gray cloudy about this, and you're trying to let the sun shine through on this stuff. I like it. You cannot keep an optimist down. Servane, you want to tackle middle class income? Do you have a particular take on what's happening? And for me, this is one of the more interesting ones. In nearly every single other crisis or war before this, there seems to be a market issue. And this one, man, your 401ks in the US or whatever the British equivalent is, they seem to be doing fine. What's going on?
Yeah, do you know what? I'm going to be a bit of a Patti Smith here. My love for punk stuff. So when I see middle class income, middle class income shrinking or middle class shrinking, I see the growth of the lower income class with the mental and physical health issues that it's correlated with. So I see that part growing, and the instabilities that go with it. So you wanted a bit of negative stuff, I'm giving you some negative stuff. However, what goes with it, and it goes with the mental health challenge, everything is related anyway. I think that there's an opportunity that is emerging in our neighborhood. Maybe before we talk about opportunity, we can see some things happening, place-based approach to refine local policies according to the needs of individuals in particular settings. And someone from a lower income class in a city will not have the same needs as someone in a rural area, in Brazil or here in London, or it's all different. But their place-based approach is something that need to be looked at. Also, as the lower income class will grow, there will need to they will need to have a sort of a social fabric weaved in together to solve this issue. So we can't make these things happen online. We will need direct human contact, direct human connection. So what does it say about social distancing? And this is where these tiny local civic sector charitable entities will be invaluable as a sort of buffer. But the government should carefully look at which type of infrastructure it will build again to start, to make all this happen, because this civic sector will not be able to do that on its own. So how is that accounted in the debt? That's not my field, but I'm sure that Rob can help me with that. How will that be accounted for in the government's plan? The civil sector cannot pick up the tab for the lack of public sector policy.
Well, and it's interesting you brought something up too, because I mean, maybe it's linked to number 7 as well. Cities and downtowns decimated, which 7th out of 39 topics. I mean, it's not top of the charts, but it's pretty close up there. It's like, which government has to enact those changes, because it feels like in certain cities there's an exodus of the rich or the privileged, and leaving whatever tax base and citizenship behind. There may be some ongoing challenges there as well.
That's playing out against an unprecedented divide between rural and urban values and politics also. So it's not. I think that a lot of people would look at cities and downtowns decimated as somebody else's problem, not mine. And that doesn't bode well for collective action.
Yeah, it is interesting how in answering most of these questions, Rob and Servane, it feels like when it's somebody else's problem, that's a really bad problem over there, or that's a really crappy solution over there. When it's me, I'm doing okay, or like my thing's okay. And so there seems to be this detached way in terms of how maybe people are answering things around the pandemic.
We need to look carefully about who answers, where they're from, where they're located. Something to think about for next 10 massive amount of work and surveying people.
Yeah, no, and I oftentimes find our sense makers spend an inordinate amount of time on the verbatims, like the stuff that you write in. And so I thought I'd give some profile to some of the stuff that weren't even on the 39 problems list. So these were the write-ins that we hadn't even conceived of. And I always find there's some level of intrigue on here. I don't know if any of these catch you or fancy at all, guys. I know, Rob, any thoughts on this list in terms of, it's all over the place here, but anything grab your attention?
I mean, the return to tribalism one is the one that registers with me. Again, coming from the U.S., and we've just kind of witnessed it at scale. And the dimensions of that problem and the solutions of it are, would have happened without the epidemic, I think, or the pandemic. I mean, but certainly has exacerbated it, particularly around the disparate effects of it. And who, what you were just saying, it's like who it's being felt by, influences your outlook. And if you are inclined to view, certain of the people as us or as them rather than us, that really hurts the ability to have the kind of coordinated response that we need.
Yeah. Any other quick observations on this one? Maybe Servane, any thoughts here?
Yeah, you knew that I would pick up on the gender gap. So, but the widening of gender gap, it can't just be seen between just men, women, and by default white men or white women. It needs an intersectional understanding of what we consider, what we're calling a shadow pandemic. And Rob, you just mentioned that's another shadow pandemic. The UN report. There's a UN report. I'll put the link in the chat about COVID-19 and girls and women that showcase a spike in domestic violence as girls and women are sheltering in place with their abusers, loss of employment for women who hold the majority of insecure, informal, or lower paying jobs, the risk shouldered by the world's nurses or in nursing professions who are predominantly women, and the rapid increase in unpaid care work that girls and women mostly provide already. All of which has a ripple effect on families and communities, as you know, and I mean, history shows it every time, where women statistically have more agency. And in all likelihood, the current sanitary emergency will exacerbate another one that doesn't go away. Well, men, we think that we see that men are more likely to die from COVID, but the social economic toll will be paid disproportionately by the world's girls and women.
It is so interesting how the rifts that exist already before the pandemic just evidence themselves in some respects even more kind of during. So
they call it the pandemic within the pandemic. Yeah.
Yes, it's like the Russian. What are those Russian dolls called? They're all
nesting dolls.
Nested dolls, I think. I know there's a longer term, right? Did you just mention it, Alexandra?
I just said nesting dolls. Same thing. Yeah.
There's a Russian term. I just can't pronounce it. So, Alexandra, anything on this list to cover us off?
Yeah, just real quick to pick up what you guys were saying, you know, things that were already existing getting worse, the education gap, which is very, you know, denoted by class and income level and stuff, especially in the United States. You know, there's a new RAND corporation study that I just read that said we can basically plan to write off this school year, this academic year for K-12. Just let it go. So many kids are failing. So many kids have disappeared, quote unquote, meaning no one really knows where they went. They never returned back to their schools. So I think that, you know, that education gap bodes very negatively, unfortunately, for a lot of the educational futures that existed prior to COVID.
I just saw something the other day too that math scores disproportionately have been affected as well. So the apparent, you know, STEM kind of measures of the future. I guess it's really tough to learn math online, perhaps. Thankfully, I'm not in that position. I need to. So, all right, we're gonna move on, and I'm gonna ask you guys to. We got so much good gold on this, and there's stuff buried like deeper in this presentation that I'm gonna give me a first blush reaction to. What scale of a problem are we into with this pandemic as you look at it? A 10-year life, because as people responded to our survey, they were all over the map between this is the great reset, we're going to be able to fix everything on the other side of it, and sure, there will be change and maybe we won't have discourse, to a COVID long haul syndrome where this dulling effect, to this industry is completely obliterated, to a societal rift that's tearing us apart like 1850s US, to an opening act tower of cards where population will be reduced through this and other crises, or a pandemic triggered pin pull where this could be the beginning of the end. So we have the full range, you know, a smart group of people. Servane, where do you think we are on this one? How dire are we?
See, so again, I would say a bit of all of it. When I saw this slide, I said, that's funny. Remember that drawing by McKay, an artist that did a cartoon there. There's a city at the sea with a caption, someone saying, not sure, be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. And you see a tsunami wave just above ready to engulf the city with the label COVID-19. And then you have behind it a much bigger tsunami wave with the label recession. And just behind a massive, huge wave with the label climate change. So I think that's just a rehearsal. And we might not have the sort of the human species extinct yet. The Earth will go on with or without us, but this was just a rehearsal.
So if you were Las Vegas, you'd be given money on all 6 of these scenarios, potentially, depending on how the future goes.
I would bet on all of it. Maybe not the last one in the next 3 months, but we're going to be served all of this on a plate, yeah.
All right, Alexandra, any similar or different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'm further down the list. I'm pretty firmly on opening act, Tower of Cards. I mean, when everything started, I said dress rehearsal, but now that it's lasted so long, I'm definitely saying opening act. And the unfortunate thing that I've noticed a lot of research about is how pandemics and climate change can form a positive feedback loop, you know, where worse warming and worse climate change conditions can actually allow more pandemics to thrive. So then, you know, things continuously devolve, let's say. So that's something that I'm concerned about in that red zone.
Interesting. And Rob, you get to be tiebreaker here, maybe, or something different.
Actually, I am slightly up the list on that. I'm more on the Corona societal rift thing, because I do feel that as intractable, and Servane, you took the words out of my mouth about this being the dress rehearsal for climate change, because I do think that climate change is a, you know, systemic problem is going to take more coordinated effort on the part of everybody, and we have failed the test of being able to do that. I do think that both the pandemic and climate change are potentially susceptible to technological remedies if we get our act together. Like, the human species is pretty ingenious, and we can come up with stuff, you know, even with the gun to our head and the clock ticking. The problem is if we can't agree on basic facts and basic values and basic objectives, and we can't pull together and pull those resources together, then the hope of that happening starts to dim. So I think that it's right now what the pandemic has exposed in terms of the limits of, democratic capitalism, the technocracy, all of the things that are regimenting the way our society works right now to respond to big global crises is the flashing red warning sign. That if we can fix that, we might be able to fix some of the other stuff that's further down the pipeline. But if we don't, then we're definitely heading toward the red.
Well, I'm glad you guys are thinking so broadly on this, because if you look on Twitter, I actually counted today, of 100 tweets about pandemic, just something in a pandemic tweet, about 60 of them were political, 35 of them were health, and then only five were dealing with some of the other things that you guys are exploring in terms of this, which is maybe the function of why we're doing the work that we're doing. Going to move on to this one. We asked people, okay, we've covered the big problems, and you've told us other big problems. What are the things that we're not talking about now that we're going to be talking about over the next 2 years? And I'm going to ask us to do this briefly, because I know I'll tease people. We are landing on a date where we think we're going to get to the post-pandemic. So this is almost like the movie teaser to the end of our deck here. So maybe, Alexandra, you can start us off. Of this list, which was based on our 8 lenses that we used within the Gray Swan Guild. You see kind of the 8 yellow on the side. That's the key way we categorize things in terms of both points of view and research, which I think I might have even asterisks yours over here. Just briefly, what catches your eye? And I think you had covered off social connections and intimacy, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, in terms of that same mental health challenge that we talked about before, creating these ongoing, problems. This one in the short term, I'm looking at, kids that are growing up, young people that are developing. I'm just curious if this is a short-term issue that our communities, maybe our schools, need to address about, how to connect with people when you haven't, really spent a year with your friends. If you're only 8 years old, a year is a really long time, and if you've been out of a classroom, or, if you haven't had, experience going to birthday parties or something. I'm thinking, in terms of the children right now. But how do we make sure that we haven't lost something in this lockdown phase and the closure phase of everything, online schooling? I'm curious if there's any truth to that idea. A lot of people had criticized homeschooling for a long time because it doesn't socialize kids. It doesn't let them meet other kids and talk and stuff. We're finding out through this experiment how true that might be. So I guess that's how I'm looking at it. What can we do to overcome that? I don't know, but I think it could be hopefully short term, mainly with Gen Z and younger. Think it could be important.
I would have gone just only slightly older, because I was thinking to myself just on the weekend, being a 23 or 24-year-old nowadays must really, really stink, right?
Right.
We get trapped up in our own lives, but your education's being messed with. You're probably the least likely to have health concerns out of a pandemic. Now, I know that's very narrow thinking, but this is not directly health-wise affecting most of that population. And whether it's dating, or whether it's going out and socializing, or whether it's your job prospects, you've been completely foiled by what's been happening here. So for the sake of time, unless you guys feel passionate, I'm going to move on to some of the long-term issues and let Rob and Servane have at in terms of the next thing, because we also asked, what are the long-term stealthy COVID threats? So these are the things that may be tangentially linked to the big problems, but they're kind of right in situations here. And once again, we did point them toward our kind of 8 lenses. And these are the things that might last for a long period of time. Rob, maybe I'll pivot to you first. What caught your eye on this list?
Again, going back to this issue of polarization and extremism, that really, again, the crisis and the undeniable reality of what has happened with the pandemic has exacerbated things that were already going on. So it's beyond a political polarization. It's almost a epistemological polarization between people that want to live in a fact-based world and people who want to live in a world of sort of belief and self-described conditions, whether it's being anti-vaxxer or whether it's not believing in COVID altogether. And the reason that this is such a problem is that it unravels the intellectual framework of our society going back to the Enlightenment. I mean, all of the ideas of science and self-government and all of these things are predicated on this idea of a shared sense of reality, and that rational people can be persuaded by fact to change their views and adopt different positions and change their actions. And if that's not true, if the view of human nature is more, Hobbesian and less, Locke, like, I mean, if this old, 300-year dispute about how, human beings process problems in reality turns out that we've been on a house of cards with that, that's a much larger cyclical problem than, just, are people going to come to their senses about this or that right now, or are people going to adopt my preferred political point of view? So that one, as somebody that reads a lot of history and have sees these moments when things unravel, that's the stuff that keeps me up at night.
And Servane, what caught your eye on this list?
Well, I'm based myself on the signal that we see now, to project myself in the long term. So I see that the way that the lockdown has strengthened the communities and make people more determined to push ahead with infrastructure projects that could make them more resilient, and I think about community ownership, fairer access to lands right, and that kind of push as well to lift some people and discriminate group that have been discriminated against, to lift them out of their situation. I think that I link up the problem of ownership with ecology and resources, and I think that a place-based commodities of food, water management, a place-based approach to housing, and sort of collaborative ownership of these kind of assets might be something that we should pay attention to. And how can we bend the future so that these assets are locally owned, decisions are made locally and collaboratively? I think if we don't do that, we're going to go towards bigger shifts.
Well, it's interesting. I think in all your evaluations too, it's like the interconnectedness of all of these things at times. It's easy sometimes to try to atomize it and try to actually say this is a specific issue, but you've just touched on something where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of different issues that cut across these different divides that are linked. It's
all interconnected, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to, Alexandra, I'm going to move on. You'll get first crack at this one, relationship impact. So we looked at about 30 different relationships that you have with different institutions, with different, let's call them weak ties in your inner circle. How are they going to be affected by this? We've already talked about, being locked at home with a spouse that may be an abuser, which is horrible. Thankfully, it's hopefully, knock on wood, a minority. But so here were the results of her survey. And maybe I'll ask Alexandra, do you want to cover off institutions for us in terms of how our relationships to different institutions around us may change coming out of this?
Yeah, I think in terms of government, people have learned a lot about their relationship to government. I mean, especially in the US where things are so dire. People are understanding, the people that run for office, people that we vote into office, they have an obligation to help us. I think it's really hitting home finally with this issue. Like, these people have a part to play in my life, and it really means something. I think that the very high voter turnout in this 2020 presidential election speaks directly to that. And looking at the media, the same thing. We've started to see how news, how information, particularly false information, can have an effect on our lives. Before, it might have been kind of funny or kind of cute to see someone, defying reality and saying that's not real. But once it became a life and death matter, I think people are waking up to the fact that we either trust our institutions or we rebuild them. And there's just no other way. When we have institutions that we can't trust, things are very untenable.
I would, you know what, we're going to spend an entire hour on another day, Alexandra, going through it, because I guess there's a contrarian point of view that it's like, it's a slight wake-up call, but then we still go about our actions the same way, right? Like Fox still has good ratings, or on the other side, whatever, far left-leaning, crazy kind of thing has the same ratings, as opposed to kind of anything in the middle seems to be getting squashed. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
But for another time. Servane, you want to talk to me about maybe our middle list here, our weak ties, and how our relationships have changed with the ones on this list?
So I didn't understand what the weak ties meant. Sorry, I'm French originally. So
Well, I
I think
guess
that
just weak ties being something that isn't like a company or a Borg, like a group of people, and not necessarily your inside circle of people that kind of
that
close, intimate associations. These are that middle group of
yeah,
people.
but that's the funny thing, because if, in my world of as a social entrepreneur, charities are very close to me. Media, local media is very close to me, and I've seen that a lot of problems were existing before the pandemic. The decline of media and the absent and the underfunding of local media, which created that kind of problem that we're having now. So I'm hanging on to my ties. And I, again, this will have a different outlook depending on where you are in the world, because people who can't have much of a say, depending on how they vote, when they can vote, on what the political leadership looks like, and keep being voted on year on. I think they probably feel very disenfranchised. It depends where you are in the world, and I have no opinion, because I will have different conversation depending on the settings where you are. Personally, I think it's what you see. If you miss what you have normally in your life, if you miss them, your friends, your parents, your neighbors, your children, when you deprive of them, then you can feel the brunt. So Rob, it's all over to you.
Apparently, if you're in New Zealand, though, everybody loves their politicians. So that's all I know. So
not everybody, but yeah, I like her, but yeah.
Rob, you want to tackle inner circle?
Yeah, I personally think that this is where the worst impact is, because it's like, so if you look at a digital photograph and you reduce that photograph down to like, 96 DPI from like 3000 DPI, you can still kind of recognize what it is, but it looks really shitty and it's not satisfying to you to look at. And it's like your deep personal, intimate friendships have so much texture and depth to them. And the people that you really care about, you can sit in a room in silence, or listen to music or communicate with very subtle amounts of implicit connections. And Zoom and all of the technologies that we're using to connect with each other are just really bad with that. Like Zoom is terrible with silence. You can't just sit there and look at somebody and so all of the added overtones and resonance that come with these intimate personal connections, whether it's friendship or family, parental ties, or meeting new people even, and getting those kind of clues, all of that is being lost in the wash here. And that's once those things start to decay, it takes work to it takes decades to build them up, and they can be lost in a short amount of time if you don't work to maintain them. So that's the kind of thing that appears to me, and it's something that I feel personally, not having those that ability to have those moments, except with people like in my very small circle, and that's hopefully that can be rebuilt, but it's something that I feel very much the loss of.
Yeah, I recall reading a book called Bowling Alone, which was all about how our number of friends has gone down precipitously over the last generation. Even though we got all these things that we can connect with, social media, texting, what have you, it's like our number of good friends that might bail us out of jail and not ask questions has gone down from 4 people to 2 people. So my hope is this pandemic hasn't caused a further reduction in that. It's interesting that Merriam-Webster came up with pandemic as their word of the year. They also had a whole bunch of things like flatten the curve and asymptomatic and a whole bunch of other terms. We thought we'd go even one step further and actually look at some really crafty terms that our panelists had come up with. You guys can choose off this list or add your own word in, but we're creating a pandemic dictionary of sorts. I don't know. For me, acedia is a big one for me. It's a big water cooler conversation thing where it's just like, I felt like it today. In fact, I haven't worn a shirt, like a collared shirt, in about 2 weeks. So I love being on here today just because my normal thing is, it's the sweatshirt and track pants day, right? And that's what acedia is. Just every day feels kind of similar. We got anticipatory grief, breathability, COVIDiots, COVID timing, critical race theory, I think, got into this as we moved along. Decalibration, apparently it doesn't exist as a word. I thought it might have, but I guess it's been invented. So it's kind of the removal of weights. It almost feels like the carpet's being pulled out from underneath you.
God.
Rob, you must know VUCA, like volatile, uncertain, chaotic. They've come up with DILA now, which is kind of like.
I love this one. I love this one.
maybe you were the panelist on this one, Servane.
I don't know. I love this one. Love this one.
Was this your favorite? Like, go on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've got a caveat to that, because I don't want the anthropocentric thing. Otherwise, we're going back in the same problem. So I would do Adele's dynamic, emergent, liminal, and systemic. Okay, when you include the built or the natural environment with it. So not just man only, but a bit more us as part of an entire system. So, this for a social entrepreneur as we are, it's how we function. We haven't got the luxury to sit in salons or be on webinars all day, although that we do that very much. So, but we have to move from thoughts to action fairly rapidly. But we also have a duty to notice, to read signals and clutch onto these, hang on to hope, and until cultivate imagination. So this word will help us build the scaffolding for a new structure. Also, I'm not interested in building back better, and I don't want any of that stuff that was there before that created so much problem. But there you go. That's Dells.
I feel like a new book coming along, Servane. Just Dells by Servane. Right. So, is any of your favorite words off this list, Rob or Alexandra, or is it the next page? Which should I pivot?
I mean, I'm on team fear porn, doom scrolling, stuff like that. Although I'm somewhat abashed that as a word guy, I don't think I contributed anything to any of these, and these are all great. These I want to use many of these.
Good for quiz, good for end of the year quiz. Bingo.
Well, I just came across this one the other day, scofflaw or scofflaw. I don't even know how to pronounce it, but a person who flouts the law. It's been a word forever, but I guess it's got new resonance now with, motorcycle rallies and people gathering without masks and a whole bunch of other things. Alexandra, do you have one we can add to the dictionary, or have you seen one that kind of speaks to you on this list?
I do like pods. I think that's a cool term, but I didn't see quarantinis on there, so I'm going to have to bring that one into the picture. That's a fun one, hopefully.
Was it quarantinis or quarantinis?
Quarantinis, like your cocktail, your quarantini.
Ah,
rather
okay.
than your martini. Yes.
Yes. Jesus Christ. Where are we going?
That is a much better conversation for a Friday at 4:30, I think. I'm not feeling it quite
Isn't
yet.
it Friday? Isn't it Friday?
Somewhere in the world.
We have no idea.
All right. I want to get to, if anything, we need to get to two very important things. This is one of them, because I think, never mind like what's happened in the world. It's like, what's happened to us, right? What's happened to our beliefs, and have they been shattered by this or not? I thought, Rob and Servane, you might want to take this first list, or sorry, wait a minute. How did I serve it up? I think, yeah, Alex and me, we'll go on the first list of what's been holding firm. So we asked about 15 different clauses in terms of, okay, these are things that you might or might not have believed in. The ones that people felt most attached to, even with all the crap that's gone on with the pandemic, was, I'm not going to congregate. I trust science. I'm staying at a social distance. I'm going to get the vaccine when it comes out, and something good will come out of this crisis. Those are the top 5 that surfaced as, look, I'm holding on. Maybe sometimes it's with fingertips, but I either believe in it more or holding firm. Anything off this list that you go, either it's heartwarming, or that you feel, wow, I didn't expect it that high, or thank God it's that high?
What kind of catches my eye is the theme here, which is, I'll do my part. I trust science. In other words, following all of the rules and doing the right thing. And finally, believing that something good will come from it. I think that's really important, that they're obviously doing it because they do believe that something good will come from it. So let's all do our part, follow the rules, and be kind to each other in the hopes that something good will happen. So I like that, optimistic theme.
Excellent. Well, that's your nature, isn't it? So it's probably the right list. And it's funny, even in a thing about pandemic, I've got a sneeze that's about to come, and I want everybody to know at home, I don't think it's anything related to the pandemic. All right. So we'll move to the next list, slipping back. So these were the things that we've either given up on the belief entirely. We have a lot less faith, or a little less faith in it. And so the top 5 here were, people generally do the right thing in a crisis. Capitalism may not be great, but it's the best system. with the right faith, we can get past this. Government has been put in place to serve the people, and COVID was not a human manufactured creation. Rob, anything off this list that you look at and go, interesting?
Well, I mean, going to what Alexandra said, I mean, I think that the big theme here is that this is, corrodes a little bit of our faith in human progress and human nature, that, the bedrock assumptions that we kind of need to run a self-governing society, trust in our fellow citizens, trust in whatever system we've adapted to distribute resources and things like that. Even our institutions of faith and belief, when that starts to, when that runs up against, the sandpaper of reality and, is found wanting, that opens up some bigger, more troubling issues, I think.
The sandpaper of reality. Man, I think I just caught one of our top 5 kind of quips of our session today, maybe. But Servane, anything off this list that you go, interesting?
No, nothing was surprising, but based on the turmoils everywhere in the world and wherever you are based, but it can be read differently. I pick up on capitalism, again, as a social entrepreneur. I see a lot of solution fueled by social investment. So capitalism can take different shapes and forms, and some people might respond with the traditional view of capitalism, or others might say, but best system if you channel the money in a do no harm way, regulate a bit more organizations so that they take in account people and planet in the way they're governed, etc. Maybe yes, we can use that kind of old old thing and transform it so maybe the belief is not really eroded, because it can still become something. And that's the same with the rest. The right faith. Whose faith? How is a humanist or religious faith? And I hope prayer takes people a long way, but it has never fed the homeless on its own. So food banks have. Maybe the faith emerges, and a new kind of faith will emerge from that. I don't know.
That's very interesting on that one. Yeah, no, it is interesting just to add our social capital. I'm curious if you took a 10-year look back at this, like you look back at historically what happened here. Have we lost some, or we actually gained some?
It's too new. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to skip over this section, not because it isn't valuable, but we have about 10 minutes, and I know people are wanting to know what our panel thought was, when are we all going to return to normal? Because they think that timing is much different than if you had asked somebody in March of 2020. So we did surface about 12 different paradoxes that perhaps sometime in January and February, we may actually create debates about this. We debated 3 topics that were paradoxes 2 months ago. Maybe we'll do some now. And these were another 6. But let's get to, I guess maybe I'll go to you guys quickly. What are you calling this period after the pandemic? Before I actually show what our panelists said, what are you guys calling it? What are you comfortable calling it? Because I know when we say the next normal, there's about 30% of the population or our guild that just recoils in horror at those 2 words. So are you guys using something else to explain what happens after this?
I'm saying post-pandemic in the same way that we would say post-war. I mean, this is a calamitous, global, socially disruptive event, and we're going to be defining ourselves in terms of it for a long time.
Okay.
Same for me. Yeah, post-pandemic as well. I think that's my term.
Yeah, I think I imagine that people will bother calling something just to sell books, but most people will talk about before and after. Personally, I call it what's emerging.
Interesting. Well, I mean, you guys, it's almost like pandemic bingo here. Like you've hit the entire board here, but it's interesting. Number 1 was the new normal, followed by some other versions of the normal, but there's an extreme polarization with that term. I hate even doing market research with that term because people resist the question. So you guys surface post-pandemic. Some people have said post-COVID-19 and rooted with the actual vaccine itself. And if I broaden out all of the answers, you get a different situation. More people said, look, this should be termed as something like after something, right? Like we had the shock and it's after something, versus the new normal, which is rooted, I think, and maybe this is the problem people have, like there's no getting back to the equilibrium again. I think people are resisting the notion that we go back to something similar to before, right? So
which equilibrium? Which equilibrium? Whose equilibrium are we talking about?
well, I mean, at some point it does settle out though, right? Like whatever the rules are that have changed, we probably end up, you know,
For the few.
maybe, I don't know. I think sometimes it's well, I mean, it's legitimate because it's people's feelings, but at some point you have to wrestle with what is my current reality, which is kind of what you said, Servane. It's like what's emerging, right?
What's emerging?
What was heartening, I guess, is number 7 was what it represents negative. More people thought what it represents positive, right? There were a number of different, probably the most colorful answers were in the what it represents positive for the future. So the New Order, I was a big fan of the band, so I find that answer a pretty good one as well.
Wasn't he sad?
They were sad, but their music was
Joy
good.
Division, Joy Division, New Order. Woo.
Myself and Servane, we could have miles and miles of conversation about punk rock.
Music, yeah.
But we won't, because this is maybe the most important question in the entire survey. And we know how it's so tough to predict the future. That's why casinos make money. That's why pollsters are always wrong. But we did ask people, what time to the new normal or the post-pandemic or whatever you want to call it. And before we asked that, we said, well, what does that actually mean? And I found this to be interesting. I'd love to get your quick thoughts on this one. It's the ability to travel freely with minimum restrictions, being able to meet people openly, being able to physically connect people we chose to. And if certain people kind of dialed it a little bit higher and said, oh, it's getting industry and business back on its legs. And then even further, I want to see the fundamental shifts in behavior to enable a new future. So people had a higher level of what the new normal might look like. Any thoughts in terms of if you were to find the post-pandemic, would this be the list, or would you have something else, guys?
Yeah, I think the fundamental shifts in behavior is what's going to underpin the rest. Probably empathy and critical thinking will be paramount to make any change possible. So solidarity for people and place we're living in and the impact we're having. If we don't see that, I don't think we would have understood any of it. And for that's the fundamental shift in behavior is quite a criteria that we need to see.
Also added
before I pivot to Rob and Alexandra, I know we're coming to the top of the hour. We are going to extend this 10 to 15 minutes past the hour. Our panelists hopefully will all remain. Hopefully be able to tackle some of your questions because I know there's a lot in the chat box right now. So Alexandra, this list make sense to you, or would you take something away or add something?
The list makes sense. I'm going with surveying fundamental shifts in behavior, and I'm thinking of the shift. It's very culturally dependent, but seeing us as more of a human family after what we've experienced together and really internalizing the idea that we take care of each other. I think in the West that really needs to click, and I'm hopeful that's part of the new normal.
And Rob?
I'm on a more pragmatic scale of this because some of my professional work pre-shit show, I guess, in the vernacular, the last slide is from the events and industry and things like that. So being able to meet openly, I think being able to meet openly in small groups and progressively larger groups versus being able to meet openly at scale at like music festivals or comic conventions or professional sporting events and things like that. I think that one is farther in the future, but I think if we segment that one out, then this looks right to me.
It's interesting, like you mentioned cinemas and arenas or sporting events, and then you throw in comic conventions. You're a geek at heart here, you.
Right. So.
And we just lost the presentation there for a second.
That was the funniest slide, I think, the one you're about to show us.
All right, let's see if this one?
Oh, no, this one. No, it's too many numbers. The one after.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, we'll go through I mean, there's the slide in terms of where people thought the new normal was settling out and however they defined it. So with the caveats in mind, the one thing is, if you look at the median date of coming back to normal and, you get a group of smart people, it's almost like that small boat survival game. You take the polls out and focus on the middle. April 2022 is when we get back to normal. That either depresses the heck out of me, or at least if I knew it was firm, I'd be like, yes, at least I can wrap my brain around it. But the more and more outside stuff I look at, the more and more I go, this is not an insane kind of number. So just a quick reaction to this time and date. Why don't we start with Alexandra?
I think it's a reasonable projection. It doesn't depress me or excite me. I just think it's a rational goal and sort of mental model to have while we keep working forward.
Rob?
That was my read in October. I have updated, I've marked my beliefs to market based on developments in the vaccine, and not just the vaccine, but also treatment and this abused concept of herd immunity. That if we actually get the vaccine out to enough people, you don't need to have universal vaccination to reduce the incidence enough that we're not worried about it. So I'm thinking more like early summer of 21 at this point.
All righty, a little bit bullish. And then Servane?
So I'll need to talk to my astrologist, because obviously whenever you bring a date like that, she says, no, it doesn't work like this, because I don't see any kind of a change in the migrant population will be accepted in Europe or in the US and calm things down. I don't see any of it happening by April 22. If it does, fantastic. But there's more to the world than just a vaccine if it is taken widely, as Rob was saying. So April 22 is again the date for whom, where, and for which equilibrium. So I refuse to put a date. All I want is to bend the future now for all that system and having a systemic approach to the problems that we're in.
It's good to paint out of the box. I mean, on the other side, though, I will argue that, and I actually ran this number by about 10 people on the weekend, and, you kind of, if you knew looking back how long something might take, you kind of change your behaviors both organizationally and personally, maybe a little bit differently if you knew what the answer was. Obviously, we don't at this stage. So,
but that depends on April is only if everybody plays the game now, right?
Well, it's true, and there's some challenges there, right? So I'm going to, for the sake of getting us out on the hour, I'm going to, there were 8 considerations in terms of why April 22 would scale up or scale down. There's a whole bunch of things, top being the vaccine, and then other things that might kick us back as well. And then maybe just give me your 10 seconds, because we've focused so much on the problems here. Give us your one statement of hope here, guys. Like, what are you hopeful for? Rob, why don't you start us off?
I'm hopeful that maybe we've learned the limitations of the old systems, and that we will take this as an opportunity to rethink things along the lines that Servane is talking about. And it's been very refreshing to hear that point of view articulated so clearly here.
All right, and Alexandra, what's your biggest sign of hope?
Going back to the idea that we start to see ourselves as very interconnected with nature, and just re-examining ourselves from a more objective position. Given that we had like a pause and a brief time where we could reflect, I hope that sinks in.
Very good note. And then Servane?
So my signal of change, and something that I really clutch onto, is a potential Green New Deal, again, translated into different countries, because it's a narrative that brings hope and shifts us towards a concrete collaborative mission that works for people, planet, in a jointly manner. That's what gives me hope.
See, I knew we could be positive coming out of this, right? We couldn't end it up
Yes.
on a critical note. I've got 2 minutes of housekeeping, and then we're going to leave this open for about 10 minutes in terms of discussion. I know there's a whack load of stuff in chat, so I'm going to take us off screen in a minute. But we do have things that are going on. As much as we've dealt with problems here, we're dealing with solutions over this 2-month installment. So if you go to the URL down below, GSG Weathervane 2, we're talking about solutions, and we're tumbling around not 39 problems, but 55 solutions. So there you go. We knew we could be positive. And this is one of the questions: what part of your life will be better in the future? Our current mission right now across the Guild is you too can write an article for us, whether it's 500, 1,000, 1,500 words, or film, photo. Right now we're in what's called wave 2 for us, and it's called Catching Our Collective Breath. Go to the front page of greatswanguild.org. You can get all the details there. We want you to write for us. We're also coaching people along the way. People go, ooh, can I write good enough, or are my pictures clear enough? We're having 2 different sessions this week to actually coach people through it and go, yes, cross the finish line with us. So Doyle will be handling those. We're also, I know, Alexandra, this is near and dear to our heart. We have the Museum of Pandemic Home Artifacts. This could be a new term that we create for our dictionary. Do you want to give your 5 cents on this one?
You have the picture.
Oh, the picture. Yeah, we have a
Yes,
really
we need
great
the
logo.
picture.
We have a little, MOFA is what we're called. And this is where we're collecting some artifacts from anyone who wants to contribute about how the home has changed during the pandemic. So we're looking at new things that have come into your home, new patterns, new experiences, and we're archiving them into a museum.
I love it. And if you have any people listening, both recorded and live, just send stuff in to member@grayswanguild.org, and we will gladly take them into our gallery. If you want to join us ongoing, you're new to the Guild or you're new to the Sensemakers, this is what we do all the time. We think about some of these issues deeply. At LOF Sense Forum, the bit.ly below, this is where you can join us. We also have a killer Medium page. We are getting massive amounts of traffic, and I think all of you at some point in time I've pegged to write on our Medium channel. So please come to Grey Swan Guild Medium. And our next event will all be about leadership in the midst of a pandemic. And that'll be Friday, December 18th. So look forward to that. Thank you, panel. I'm going to ask you guys to stay maybe for a few more minutes as I tumble through the chat. Maybe as I'm doing that and taking us off screen, you can just maybe mention, what did you learn from our panel today? Servane, what did you learn?
That it's so good to be in companionship of other future thinkers and sense makers, because it really animates you and give you a lot of ideas.
Ooh, I like that. That's infectious. Alexandra, what did you learn today?
Something similar. I learned that there are a lot more people than I thought with a positive outlook that are working towards something. And, as long as we have this collective problem, we can have collective goals. And I find that very exciting.
Wow. Okay, we are ending on good notes here. Rob?
Just, the tendency when you're on your own is to sort of focus on your own stuff, and certain things are in your peripheral vision, but you don't see them as important. And this, or you don't see them as important as what you're focused on. And being in a group like this is great. It's like a rack focus, it's like the stuff that's outside the frame suddenly snaps into picture. I really appreciate the contributions of my fellow panelists, because it's helped me focus on stuff that I kind of knew was out there, but hasn't been presented to me with the passion and perspective that you guys brought to it.
Wow, really good parting thoughts on that one. I'm catching a lot of things in the chat and just catching up with a ton of it. Apparently people say astrologers should be on our future panel as well. So I am phoning Dionne Warwick now to see if she's available next time we do these, but
they don't do dates. They don't do dates, remember.
No dates. Although you know what? It's funny. Like, we'll post a date online, Servane, and I hate to say it, the traffic will flow. The marketer in me knows.
Yeah, you can always attract them there.
And Atlantic Council, like 5 months ago, Atlantic Council, which is an esteemed group of, I want to say 700, 800 big eggheads, landed on the date of December 2021. And with advance information and timing, our number doesn't seem too far off that, but I understand why people resist it. Maybe as we go through it, and please feel comfortable if you're still online to ask any questions of our panel. As they do that, I'm wondering, we're moving from problems to now solutions. The next 2 months, we're going to focus on solutions. You want to lead the witness on this one and bias people in terms of what you're seeing as an interesting kind of Christmas globe that you're looking through in terms of what the future may hold solution-wise? Anybody?
I think there's a sort of an attraction towards the gaming of future games and exercise, because it gives people agency. And I see a lot of this stuff popping everywhere. Every now and then people get, okay, and realize that imagination is paramount, and it can turn into something that they can do every day. So I see a lot of it happening in communities, and not just in social enterprises, but the power of imagination and something that you can have power with.
I'm running a scenario planning session for my class at University of Washington tonight. The class is on future of marketing, but I think that just as important as looking at all of the subject matter is the ability to tell coherent stories to ourselves about possible futures and be able to sort of think about that in a narrative way to give it some meaning. So I completely endorse that as a.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point, Rob. It's one of the reasons why we want to do events like this, right? We could have just launched this as a report, which we will in 2 weeks' time, but I think we have to socialize kind of our experiences and stories and storytell. So, Alexandra, any solutions for the future you're looking at?
Yeah, I've been talking in scenarios too, obviously, Rob. I'm looking at the future of education and really just the future of the youth life stage. I'm thinking about how we could have something similar to what in the US was called the Civilian Conservation Corps. It gives people something to do, it gives them money, it gives young people a path, they get to fix the environment, they get to learn how to survive in nature, and come closer to each other, and then from there they can, get a job, higher education, run for office, whatever they want to do. But I'm thinking something on the scale of the Community Conservation Corps would address not just the economic issues that we have, but the environmental ones that are coming down the line.
Wonderful. Maybe I have a guild specific one, and I'm going to speak to Servane, but I know all of you have probably a musical interest. We need to create the pandemic soundtrack of our life.
Yes.
Some really good conversation. I want to know what our guild can put on Spotify that becomes kind of like the deeply pensive unraveling of the world's challenges from a musical standpoint. It would be a nice companion piece to our MOFA house, as we've called it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there seems to be just a lot of good love for us on our chat. People wanting it to be February 22nd, 22. I guess there's a numerology involved in that as well.
I was started.
I really want to thank the panel, though, for coming together today and really thinking deeply about this stuff. That's what we try to do in the Guild. Alexandra, Rob, Servane, much appreciation. We will definitely want to talk about this in the future and compare our answers, certainly a year from now, if not sooner. But
yes.
And I will, for the sake of just getting people on to the next thing that they need to in their day, I will just close this out, admittedly abruptly, and say, looking forward to unraveling the challenges of the future. Hopefully we'll do it all together. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.